If you're interested in learning more about the Nikon D3500, then stay tuned. This video is for you. I've received a lot of questions regarding the Nikon D3500, which is the camera right here. Like I do with my other videos, I'm going to lay out the game plan. I've got a list of notes right here. Now I took some notes as I researched this camera because I wanted to stay on point and I want to ensure I don't miss anything, and I want it to be as detailed as I can about this camera. Now I'm going to start off by going over some of the similarities that this camera shares with the D3400. Then I'm going to also talk about some of the features that have been added or modified, and then I'm going to talk about the items that have been removed from this camera. Now when all that's said and done, I'm going to jump right in and I'm going to go over some of the settings on this camera that I'm going to make to it right out of the box before we go out and do a demo. Now when we do the demo, I'm going to do my best to take a handful of shots like I do with some of the other camera reviews, just real world shots. You know, we got, as I mentioned, some sun outside, so I'll try to grab some of those full-on sun type shots, maybe get some macros in there, maybe a little bit of action work, and always finish up with some nighttime shots. I like to see what this camera can do as we put it through the paces. Now when all that's said and done, I'm going to give you my few final thoughts and wrap it all up with the conclusion on this camera. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump right in. The Nikon D3500 shares the same sensor and resolution as the D3400, although I will say at the press release that Nikon said that the sensor was updated. Now I'm not sure exactly what that means because on paper and from a specification perspective they appear to be identical. But maybe it'll prove out to be better image quality or something to that extent, and that's always welcomed. Now the other similarity is that this camera also has Bluetooth and that the shutter speed ranges from 30 seconds all the way up to 1/4000th of a second. Now if you're new to the world of photography, you might say, well, what does that mean exactly? Well, 30 seconds is just as it sounds. It's a long time to leave the shutter open, and you can do a lot with that when it comes to night shots. 1/4000th of a second is also pretty fast. Now some cameras out there will go 1/8000th of a second, and obviously that's double the speed, but how often will you use 1/4000th of a second? Not very. It really just depends on what you're trying to shoot. So they share the same shutter speed. And when it comes to ISO, this ranges from 100 to 25,600. So if you're new to the world of photography again and you're wondering what is ISO, well, the lower the ISO is, the better the image quality. So at ISO 100, that's standard in just about every camera out there. There are some that go down to 50, and that makes it even better. But most any camera you come across is going to be a low ISO of 100. Now the upper end of that ISO is kind of important. Some cameras level out at 6400, some might get you in the 12,000 range, and again this one tops out at 25,600. So what does that mean? Well, if it's really dark outside and you're wanting to take that shot without a flash, you're going to need a higher ISO. What's important to remember about that is that the higher the ISO, the more noise you introduce to the image, and that means grain, so the image will look grainy. But at least you can capture the image by going up and extending that ISO. So that's what's nice about that. This has a continuous burst mode of up to 5 frames a second. It's the same as found in the 3400, and that's quite a bit. So if you hold the shutter button down, it'll take 5 frames per second. It's essentially what that's all about. It has an 11-point autofocus system. There's nothing overly special about that. It's kind of low, but really depends on what you're doing with that. It'll also take video at 1080p up to 60 frames a second. Now you can scale that back as well if you want, but that's just the upper limit on this camera. Nikon also removed the Aaa filter. Now I've answered a lot of questions about this, and I really like this fact from Nikon. The Aaa filter is the anti-aliasing filter. It's also known as the low pass filter. What that basically means is that it tends to soften images when it's in the camera. So a lot of entry-level cameras have the Aaa filter. Nikon removed it, so it's kind of nice to see that. So what's been added or modified to this camera? Well, the body to begin with. So this has kind of the look and feel of the 5600. The hand grip on the left or the right hand side over here, your left, my right, is a little deeper, so it's reminiscent of that 5600. The buttons on the back of the camera, they went from the left-hand side on the 3400 to the right-hand side, so it's all accessible with your right thumb when you're holding the camera, and that's kind of nice. The other thing they did is they managed to lighten this camera by 30 grams. Now, that's not a huge amount, but it's just something to note, I guess. The battery performance on this camera also gets a 30% boost compared to the 3400, and that's nice. So the 3400 on a full charge will shoot at around 1200 shots or frames. Now this 3500 will shoot 1550, so that's a nice welcomed addition. It's a nice boost on a camera that already had a strong battery. Now this camera also uses SnapBridge. Now if you've seen my video on SnapBridge, I'm not real big on it. I think it's a little flaky at times. But the addition here is that you can remotely take a shot or remote shutter capability with SnapBridge. They enabled that on this 3500, and that makes it kind of nice. What's been removed from this camera? Well, Nikon dropped the infrared sensor, and what that means is that you're not able to use the wireless remote. Now, I've used that in a handful of other videos, so what do you do in place of that? You have to use SnapBridge in your smartphone. That's essentially what that's all about. They also removed the function button. So there was a function button on the D3400 on the left-hand side over here. Your right, my left, right where my finger's pointing. And that function button was nice because you could assign it to do different tasks. By default, it was assigned so that when you held it down, you could quickly adjust the ISO. Well, there is no more function button on the 3500. It's just one more notable that they have changed. So that's about it for now, and what I want to move into is some of the modifications I would make out of the box to this camera with regards to the settings. So let's jump on it. I'm going to start off by hitting the menu button on the back of the camera, which is right here. Now, as we get into this, keeping in mind this is not meant to be a deep dive on all these settings, I'm basically going to modify this camera coming right out of the box to the way I like it. Now, that may not be the same way you want it, but this is how I'm going to set this camera up before we jump into the demo. So with that said, I'm going to start off in the shooting menu. I'm going to come over to the right hand side and I'm going to go down to image quality. Now this is set for JPEG fine, which may be okay in many circumstances. However, I like shooting in RAW, so I'm going to go ahead and select RAW here. I'm going to come down and see some of the other settings and if there's anything I want to change here. I think I'm going to change this option right here. Now this is the light on the front of the camera that goes on to help illuminate the subject. Now I find that to be a little annoying. If you're in a dark situation, it might be kind of helpful to put a little light on that subject so the camera can better focus. But for me, I'm going to go ahead and shut that off. And let's go down and see what else we got. Okay, I'm good with all that. I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to go down to the setup menu. Now, let's start at the top. I don't know if I'm at the top yet. Let me just, these things kind of just keep on running. This looks like the top because it's reset setup options. Okay, so I'm going to come on down and let's see what we got. All this looks okay. I'm okay with the info display format. I'm okay with all that. The self timer looks good. All that looks good. So on the beep option. Now, when you lock focus, you hear the audible beep. Now you'll also see it inside the viewfinder. For me, I'm going to go ahead and I'm okay either way with this. You can kind of hear it right there. I'll go ahead and leave that on low, I guess. It is kind of nice to hear an audible, so I'm okay with that, I guess. Now the buttons. So the buttons, I like back button focus. Now I have a whole video on this and I'll post a link in the description as well. I'm going to go ahead and set it up on this camera real quick. Now what this means is I can take the button right up here, which I don't think we can quite see it in the video, but it is the AEL and the AFL button. I'm going to go ahead and assign that to lock focus for me, and I'm going to do that by coming down here and selecting AF on. Now the other thing I'm going to do is come down to the AF activation, and this is referring to the shutter button where your index finger pushes. I'm going to go ahead and turn this off, or I'm going to disable it. Now if you leave that on, it means that focus will lock either way. Again, I really like the back button focus. Check out the video. Again, the link will be in the description, and it'll let you know kind of why I do this little piece right here. Okay, so I'm going to go back. Let's see what else we got. I think that might be, yeah, I think all that looks good right there. I'm okay with everything. So with that in mind, I think those are just the basic settings I'm going to jump on right now. Something else I'm going to do is go ahead and hit the I button right here. And actually I might have to hit menu, then hit I. And this gives you a quick reference to some of the other settings. You can get to these in the menu as well. But right here, I want to double check a few things. So our focus mode, I'm going to come in here because I want to select continuous servo. Now what this will allow us to do is that when I'm using the back button focus, I can hold that button down and it will track that subject as long as I keep the focus point on them. So I always like the AFC. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. The AF area mode, I like wide, which is kind of where we're at right here. Let me take a look. We have single point. You know what? I stand corrected on that. I'm going to go with single point right here. So this will allow me to lock focus on the specific subject that I want, and I can actually focus right in if I'm doing portraits on eyeballs, things like that. So single point. Metering, I do like full metering here, or matrix. Yeah, that's what they call it here, is matrix. So I'm good with that, and I'm good with everything else in here. So now that the camera is set up and ready to go, let's go out and take a bunch of shots.
Leaving on a midnight train, take me far away from here. Full moon hill shining, pale light. I'm driving, yeah. Take me far away from here. Right now, 'cause I won't wait till I find my way back home. Right now, baby. Right now, baby. Right now, baby. Right now, baby. Catch you from the garden, better say prayer. This ain't no place of mercy, safety. Finally, take me far with me. 'Cause all our lives we play this game, dance on through, burning flame. I'm burning, baby. I'm burning, baby. I'm burning, baby. Burning, baby.
I had a lot of fun taking images with this Nikon D3500, and now it's time to give you a few final thoughts. I'm going to start off with just a few pros. To begin with, I feel that Nikon still produces one of the better APS-C sensors on the market. The image quality is great, dynamic range is good, and I think it generates all around good images. The other thing with this camera is that it includes a guide mode. Now, if you're relatively new to DSLRs, it helps you to navigate some of those daunting tasks, which really aren't that bad, but the guide mode's there to help you out. So I think it's kind of nice that they put that on this camera. The other thing that's nice here is that Nikon removed the Aaa filter, which is the anti-aliasing filter. Now, anti-aliasing filters, also known as low-pass filters, tend to soften images, and they're typically found on many of the other entry-level DSLRs on the market today. So it's nice that it's removed from this camera. By the way, it's also removed from the D3400 and the 3300. So it's just nice that Nikon has done that with these cameras to give you that extra sharpness that you're looking for when you go to take a picture. Now, a couple of cons. To begin with, Nikon removed the infrared sensor from this handle, and I'm not a fan of that because I use my wireless remote all the time for those night shots and when I want to get into bulb mode and I'm taking fireworks and things like that. Now, the trade-off is that Nikon did enable remote shooting via the SnapBridge application. Now, I've never been a big fan of SnapBridge because it's always been a little kludgy, but they have gotten better. They've made some different updates to it, and they've released some different firmwares that let SnapBridge work a lot better with this 3500 and the 3400. So they're doing a better job with it. Now, the last con I have to talk about is that Nikon removed the function button, which is right here on the side of the camera. That's where it was on the D3400. And that function button was great. I used it all the time on the 3400 to quickly adjust my ISO. And what I found is when I was out taking a bunch of shots is I had to go into the menu system to adjust the ISO, and that really wasn't convenient. Now, if you leave your ISO in auto mode, it's not a big deal. So those are my two cons, listed a few pros, and now just some general thoughts. So if you have the D3400, should you upgrade? No, I wouldn't upgrade. The quality of image between the 3500, 3400, and the 3300, really, they're all about the same. They virtually use the same sensor, they have the same resolution, and the image quality is going to be almost identical. Now, Nikon's going to stop the production of the 3400, so if you're looking for an entry-level camera, the 3500 is still a viable option. I'd give it some thought. So I hope this video has helped you out. If it has, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Something else is that I'm on Instagram. Now, I'm going to post a link to my Instagram account in the description below, so if you want to follow me, go ahead and do so. My account is called Real World Pics. And if you haven't done so, subscribe to the channel. More often than not, I post videos about photography and technology, but you never know. So until the next video, take care of yourself and be safe.